This is Path of Exile. This is also Path of Exile, just a little bit earlier in the game. So how do we go from this to this? Path of Exile is a complex game with tons of different features and an incredibly high skill ceiling. You might feel tempted to jump ahead or try to learn all the individual parts and pieces, but you really shouldn't. You got to take the game one step at a time and understand how each of the pieces fit together. Path of Exile is known to include new functionality every time they drop an update, and that new functionality is often siloed in such a way that you can ignore it entirely. But if you don't understand that going into the game, it might feel overwhelming that you have to learn all of these things, or you might not be getting the full experience. We're going to go through the campaign, and we'll come out the other end with a character that can take you into the end game and start to experience all those different pieces and those different pieces of functionality that Path of Exile offers, and hopefully give you a good idea of where that skill ceiling lives. That way you can understand that most people aren't there. Most people are not even remotely close to what you typically see on a stream that you might watch. We'll call out as we go along what pieces of the campaign aren't necessary, which ones aren't required for you to effectively complete the campaign. And that might seem strange because of the way that the information might be presented to you as you play, but we'll make it very clear what is a main storyline, what is a side quest, and what is an ancillary feature that you don't necessarily have to partake in. This video series will break down the campaign into various parts to help you get from Act 1 all the way through the very end of Act 10, and then into the end game, where arguably the real game starts. Once we get to the end game, we'll go through, we'll teach you how to find builds and guides and try to understand some of the mechanics that are a little bit more complex. For most new players, getting through the campaign is the first challenge, so let's start there. In this video, we're going to learn how to download the game, how to select a league, create a character, and get your character to town. We'll recap at the end with a few bits about how towns function, but then we'll get into the actual campaign progress in the next video. The first thing to know is that Path of Exile is free. Entirely free. You can play the entire game without having to spend any money. Now, Grinding Gear Games does make money by selling cosmetics and quality of life features, such as stash tabs or character skins. You can play on PC or on console. We're just going to focus on PC for this video, and on PC there are two primary ways to download and play the game. The first way is to use the Path of Exile client. You can download that from their website using the Play Free Now button or the PC button at the top. The second way is to download it from Steam. If you're not familiar with Steam, it might be best to go through the normal client from their website. Let's talk about the differences between the standalone client and the Steam client. On the standalone client, you will often find yourself having earlier access to patches and having fewer authentication issues because you're not reliant on Steam being up. On Steam, you'll get the achievements and the playtime, but you won't have your friends list inside of Steam the way that you might think you would, as you are still required to create a Path of Exile account that you ultimately will be logging into. My recommendation is to create an account on the Path of Exile website first. I would go to the website and either create an account with your email or create an account with Steam and create that before you download the game. That way it's a little bit easier to log in and start playing the game once you get the game downloaded. Once you've downloaded the game and you've logged in, you'll get to a screen like this where you can create new characters. We're going to start by creating a character, but we're going to discuss selecting a league first. There are two different types of leagues. There are standard leagues and there are challenge leagues. The word challenge here is a little bit misleading. Don't take this as this is an extra challenge, it's super hard. Take it as this is a new season, the latest update, if you will. So what's the difference between a standard league and a challenge league? Challenge leagues always have the latest content, the latest game mechanics, and the latest items. Standard, however, is the latest stable game. the game without the experimental features, the brand new items that might not be perfectly balanced. Imagine you're playing a game like League of Legends or Fortnite, and they wanted to release new content. They might do that on a PTR, a public test realm. And think of challenge leagues like a more formal public test realm. The standard league is the catch-all. The everything ended up here once it was confirmed to be good and a stable part of the game. When you look at the screen, it might be confusing at first. And that's because there's a lot of information that they tried their best to break down into digestible parts. So let's look at this big gap between standard and affliction. That separates the standard league on the left from the challenge leagues on the right. Within standard, you have options, and then within the challenge league, you have options. The current challenge league is known as affliction. The previous challenge league was known as ancestor. Every time that Path of Exile releases a new league, they give it a friendly 1-2 word name and they plaster it everywhere. Depending on when you're watching this video, it might say something else. It might say bananas. One thing to note is that when a challenge league ends, so when affliction is done and they're about to move on to the next league, the characters you create in affliction or in the current league will move over to standard league. So you'll always have access to them. You won't lose them. They don't get deleted when a league ends. They just move to standard. And some pieces that character might get converted so it plays in standard, or some items that won't make it into the main game because they were imbalanced or they need more testing, they might get removed. But the character as a whole stays in standard. My recommendation would be to choose the latest challenge league in softcore. Most people you see online playing Path of Exile will likely be playing the latest challenge league, usually this middle banner. That's the one you'll likely want to pick, but let's break down a few of the options that you see. If you choose to make a standard character, you're given 3 options. Hardcore, where your character death is permanent. Solo self-found, where you can't trade with other players and you can't join a party. And Ruthless, a game mode made by insane people for insane people who don't enjoy playing with loot. But seriously, Ruthless is an incredibly difficult game mode, and if you were to check this right now, your first playthrough, you might have a pretty bad time. If you play in a challenge league, in this case Affliction, you're given the same options, but they're presented in a slightly different format. Instead of having a button for hardcore, hardcore is actually a separate banner entirely. So once you choose between playing softcore or hardcore, again, hardcore is where your character dies permanently, you then can choose the same options for solo self-found, where you can't trade and you can't join parties, or Ruthless. For 99% of you, especially if this is your first time playing, I highly recommend the center banner. Okay, now that we've decided which league we want to play, in this case, softcore Affliction, we're going to create our character. So let's click on the banner, and we'll see an option of 6 or 7 different characters. We're going to walk through each of these before you select one. That way you have a general idea of what they do. The first thing to note is that there are 7 classes. This center one, you won't have access to right away. You have to unlock her while you play the game. So while we will briefly cover her, we're not going to dive into what she does until much later in the series. First up is the Marauder. They're the closest thing that you'll find to a barbarian. They primarily use strength, they're very tanky, they use heavy weapons and heavy armor. Now, technically, any character can use any item. We'll get into that later, but if you want something that's a little bit more tanky and in your face and oftentimes melee, Marauder's a pretty good bet. Next up, we have the Ranger. They're your typical bow class. They'll primarily use dexterity and light to medium armor. They're pretty fast, they zoom around a lot, but can oftentimes be a little squishy. Now we have the Witch. They're your typical caster class, something that of a sorcerer, a wizard, a necromancer. They use light armors, they primarily deal in intelligence, they throw fireballs and ice spears, and they summon the dead. At this point, we've gone through the 3 classes that primarily use strength, dexterity, and intelligence. Now the next 3 classes use hybrid versions of those. First up, we have the Duelist. The Duelist uses the hybrid between a Marauder and a ranger, so strength and dexterity. They're typically a little bit faster and more squishy, but they deal with heavier weapons, swords, lances, etc., and deal a decent amount of damage. Here we have the Templar. They're the hybrid of a Marauder and a Witch, where they use strength and intelligence primarily. They're your typical paladin class that loves auras and things that fly around them and smashes their face into the enemy. And second to last, we have Shadow. This is your typical rogue class. It's the hybrid between a ranger and a witch, where it uses dexterity and intelligence. Sneaky, hides in the shadows, a little stabby with their daggers. That's what you'd expect from a shadow. Last but not least, we have the Scion. The Scion is a one-size-fits-all, all-around class. It can use strength, dexterity, or intelligence. Again, you won't have access to her until you unlock her in the game. Now, before we go too far, I just want to call out ascendancies. You may have heard the term ascendancy, and you might be looking here for a class that you really want to play but you don't see. For example, I play a Deadeye. Deadeye is an ascendancy of Ranger. Later in the game, you'll have an option to take any of the characters that you select, and you'll be able to ascend into one of 3 subclasses. These subclasses are specific specializations. For example, Deadeye might be very helpful in playing a bow ranger. We'll get more into that later, but know they exist. Just know that you might be referring to a subclass and not the actual class itself. So let's go ahead and create our character. I primarily play ranger, so that's what I'm going to play for this walkthrough. You should play whichever character speaks to you. Choose anyone, any which one. And no matter what, as we walk through, I assure you we'll make sense of it. So select your character, give it a name, press OK, and we'll get into the game. In this case, you're on a beach. You can read all the lore, you can listen to all the dialogue, and you'll understand why you're on a beach. But to start, I'm going to click the screen. I'm going to wake my character up. I see an item on the ground already, so I'm going to go pick that up. You can see I already got equipped. You can see down in the bottom right, these are my primary abilities. Since I just woke up on a beach, I only have one of them, and it's assigned to left click. If you press left click anywhere, you're actually just going to move by default unless you're clicking on an enemy. You can hold down shift to see what that attack does. In my case, it just shoots an arrow. We see on the beach we have a dying Exile. How pleasant. With an exclamation point over his head, we're going to click on the Exile, and he's going to tell us some stuff. I'm going to skip through it, and he's going to get eaten by a zombie. So we're going to kill the zombie, and he'll drop something for us. He has dropped a skill gem. Now we're going to dive into skill gems later, more in depth. So for now, we're going to click on the skill gem, and we're going to pick it up. It's going to go in our inventory. So we're going to use whichever hotkey it says for you to open your inventory, and you're going to take that skill gem and put it into a matching color socket on your item. You'll see that when that happens, a new skill appeared in my skill bar. On my right click now, I have Burning Arrow. So when I right click, it shoots a Burning Arrow. So let's go ahead and work our way down the beach. Now, you're free to go ahead and attack all of these monsters and kill them. You really don't have to, but you can. You totally can. I'm just going to keep running, and we're going to look for a chest, and there it is. Large chest. I'm going to open it, and another skill gem. While I get attacked, I'm going to move a little bit further down. I'm going to open my inventory, and I'm going to place that skill gem in the other open socket. Now you'll see on mine, when I hover, this is Burning Arrow. I have to kill this annoying bug while I explain to you. There we go. You can see that we have Burning Arrow. Burning Arrow is our primary skill right now. It's our primary attack that we're going to be using. This new skill, in my case, Momentum Support, this is our support gem. When I place it into the second socket, you'll see that there's this bar that connects these two sockets. That means that they're linked. So if I hover the Burning Arrow now, you'll see that the Momentum Support highlights as well. That means it's being supported by momentum. We'll go into that deeper later, but once you do that, you'll be able to progress a little bit further. Again, we don't have to kill these guys. I'm going to take a potion by pressing 1. That might be a different key for you depending on your setup. And I'm going to kill these guys so I can get my potions back. You earn potion charges by killing enemies in this game. So you can see my potions are just kind of filling up as I go along. Again, you don't have to kill anyone on the beach except for one primary person who we're coming up on right now. So we're going to run past all these little guys, and we're going to go and find our friend Hillock, or Hillock, depending on how you want to say it. And here he is. So we have to kill him. Depending on your class, this might be standing next to him and punching him, but you're primarily going to use your main skill that you just picked up. You'll see that I ran out of mana, so I'm going to press 5 to use a mana potion. That way I can use that skill some more. I'm going to keep catching him on fire with my burning arrow. Again, it might be a different skill for you. And now he's dead. He's going to drop some loot. I'm going to pick it all up. We're going to walk this way, and there's a wall. This wall is telling you that you have to apply your skill point. And at this point, it's going to be a little scary, potentially intimidating. And if anyone has ever explained Path of Exile to you, they may have used this to scare you into trying Path of Exile for some reason. At least that's what happened to me. You can see that the tutorial down the bottom left says to press P, or to click this button to open your skill tree. We're going to do that, but we're going to assign a skill point, and we're going to get out of there very quickly because we'll talk more in depth about the skill tree in the next video. So let's do that. Let's press P. You'll see that we're now on a skill tree, and we'll look for this colorful blue, red, green circle. Yours might be in a different area on this skill tree, depending on who you selected. We're going to use our scroll wheel to zoom in, and we're going to select one of these 2 gold highlighted nodes. You'll notice that we can't actually click these because requirements are not met. That's because you have to select skill points in order. So I'm going to select one of these 2. In this case, I'm going to choose the projectile damage and accuracy, because why not? You can change these in the future. It's tricky how you change them. We'll get into that, but just select one. You can always restart, or you can always redo it later. Don't worry too much about it. Once you select one, press apply and press escape to get out of that screen as quickly as possible. Now that our wall's gone, we're going to walk up this little path and we're going to go into town. And now we're entering Lionized Watch. Now that we've made it to town, we're going to walk into the actual town and we're going to see what's going on. You'll see that we have a staircase with a waypoint. If you go the other direction, there's another staircase over here, a little more sloppy of a staircase, and you can walk into the actual town. I see other people playing. That's awesome. And I see a few different NPCs with exclamation points over their head. We can talk to each of them. They'll give us quests or tell us to do things. So I'm going to click through and not bore you with the details. You can listen to their speeches on your own. But when we talk to Tarkley here, you'll notice that he's going to give you a reward, and this reward is another skill gem. In my case, I have already received Burning Arrow. He's offering me 5 separate skill gems that I can choose to start. Take your time, read through them. They'll explain what they do. You can't really make a mistake here because you can always buy a gem once you've seen it. So I've seen Burning Arrow and I've seen these 5 gems. I'll take Split Arrow, for example. And I'm going to walk over to Nessa. I'm going to say, I want to purchase items. I'm going to go to our second tab, and you'll see that those gems are here because I've seen them throughout the game, or at least I've seen them from an NPC. So if you make a mistake and you want a different skill, you can always come back and you can spend a Scroll of Wisdom. In some cases, they're a little more expensive, but you can spend a Scroll of Wisdom to get whichever skill you'd like. On top of all that, you'll notice that there's a notice board. This is mostly going to go unused unless you want to play in a random party with people. Increases the difficulty a little bit because as you increase the number of players in your party, you're also increasing the difficulty and the loot amount. Lastly, we have our stashes. If you're in a guild, you might have a guild stash here. When you open your stash, it's not going to look like this. I promise it's going to look more like this. Small brown tabs, basic inventory space. The key to note here is that every town is going to have some NPCs, it's going to have some stashes, and it's going to have, most importantly, a waypoint. And when you click on waypoints, you'll see different areas inside of the act that you're currently in that you can navigate to. This is just like Diablo 2, if you're familiar, and that once you find a waypoint throughout the world, click on it, you've activated the waypoint, and now you can use it as a permanent place to teleport to and from. It's important to understand, though, that when you look at this map, if one of these circles is black like this, that means there is no waypoint in that zone. If it's black with a tiny circle inside of it, that means there is a waypoint in that zone, but you haven't unlocked it yet. And if it's entirely blue, which you'll see later on, that means there is a waypoint, There, you've found it and you can travel to it. If you've made it this far and you've liked what you've seen so far, make sure you press that subscribe button. That way you can find more videos in the future. And go ahead and press the like button as well. That way you can help other people like you find this video. That way they can also get into Path of Exile and learn how to play. In this video, we've learned how to download the game, how to select a class and a league, how to pick up loot, how to equip skill gems, how to use potions, and how to get to town. And that's a lot already. But in the next video, we're going to get into those skill gems specifically and understanding how to read them. The passive trees, that big mesh of nodes that we opened up and quickly selected one before leaving. We'll also go into basics of loot and gearing so you understand what to pick up along the way. And then we'll also talk about how to use currency and what currency is before we end up walking through Act 1. Last but not least, if you liked what you see and you want to watch it live, go follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/spooky. I stream 5 days a week, every day except for Mondays and Thursdays. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.